He is risen. Amen. He's risen. Amen. And he will come again. This week of Easter is a week of both remembrance and anticipation for Jesus believers. It's remembrance of Jesus' brutal execution on the cross and burial in Joseph's tomb. It's a remembrance of his resurrection on the third day, today, Resurrection Sunday. It's a remembrance of his ascension 40 days later and of his gift of the Spirit 10 days after that. And of the anticipation of the promise of his return as King of Kings. On Wednesday at the Last Supper celebration, I was reminded of a wonderful Hebrew phrase, Hamelech Olam, King of eternity. The phrase is actually exactly the same in Greek, Basileus to Ioniou, King of the ages. And we just usually translate it as King forever. It feels really weak. King of eternity sounds awesome. And he is awesome. That is the promise, that when Jesus comes back, as he taught us to pray, his kingdom has already come in heaven. The ascension is not some metaphor. He ascended to the throne in heaven. He rules and reigns without any restriction or any impediment in heaven. He taught us to pray, may that same kingdom extend to the whole earth, the whole cosmos, the whole of creation. Do you still pray that? It's a wonderful truth. And it reminds us, it infuses us with the reality that Jesus' reality will become all of reality. He will become greater as we become less. But he will become greater. That wonderful passage in Philippians 2 that talks about Jesus and reveals the mystery of how he who knew no sin became sin. That's not Philippians 2, but anyway, it's the same principle, but it ends with, and that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow in heaven above, on the earth below. Every knee and every tongue, believer and unbeliever alike, will confess that Jesus is the Lord. How much better to embrace that truth, the reality and the consequences of it now. And there are many consequences, most of which are amazing, some of which are profoundly challenged in our lives on a day-to-day basis. But the point of emphasizing these things and to say where it's going is to say Jesus prepared his disciples because he was taking them on a journey. And that journey isn't over. Just as he prepared the original 12 and 120 and then 3,000 and 5,000 and however many billion it is now, he has been preparing all of us. Because he has all of us, each and every one of us, on a journey. He's taking us somewhere. And Easter is one of the high points of the journey. And I do mean high points. It was overwhelmingly complex and full of grief in the moment. But the author to the Hebrews, I think, expresses it the best, where he says, let's consider Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. There was a joy that he could see on the other side of the cross. But as we found out in the garden, there was no other way to that joy except through enduring the cross. What I described just now as a brutal execution, because that's exactly what it was. It was both brutal and it was an execution. So the point is that we live in anticipation. Easter is a reminder of that anticipation. And there is this sense of, unless we understand Easter, we're like in that limbo period between when somebody has passed away and the memorial service hasn't happened yet. We did a memorial comparatively recently, and it reminded me again of how important those services are. They're not just religious tick boxes. They are deeply significant spiritually and psychologically. They help to close the gap. Up until the memorial service, we get confused about what tense do I use to speak of this person that I knew. There's the sense in which they're not here, but they're still around, but they're not around, but they're definitely not here. When the memorial happens, it's like the official goodbye. And there is this opportunity to look forward, to live again. In fact, there is that realization that the best way to honor them is to live. The best way to honor them is to continue to live. For Jesus' disciples, their understanding of this actually started in the upper room, the night that he was betrayed. So I want to start there, because I've titled this from the tomb to the table. But actually, I'm going to start with the table and then move forward to another table. So Luke 22, starting from verse 10, he says this. He replied, "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where's the guest room that I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there." They left and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. We just celebrated communion. And some of you were there on Wednesday when we did the reenactment of that meal that Jesus sent the disciples to prepare for. I just really loved that phrase. Jerusalem would have been packed at the time. It was, if you could afford it, it was the thing to do, to go up to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover there, the city of the great king, the city to which and from which the king would reign. But at the time of Jesus, the city where a wannabe king was reigning, Herod, a wannabe king, not even fully Jewish. That was the place to be, though. And Jesus didn't send them just anywhere. Houses at the time generally did not have second levels, because it was a challenging business and building, not business, a challenging building thing to put a second story in. Not impossible, but challenging. So Jesus sent them ahead to find a place that was not average. So the Jerusalem would have been full. They needed a bigger place. And Jesus knew how to prepare for that. And he told the disciples when it was time to go and do it. It's super easy to get frustrated with the Lord when he doesn't tell us everything that we think we should know when we think we should know it. He has this habit. Jesus had it too. He was prepared. And the disciples, we don't see them asking beforehand, or what are we going to do when we get to Jerusalem? They knew Jesus had it sorted. They left Jesus and found things just as he had told them. Sometimes we struggle, we strain, we fight to know things that we've asked Jesus to take care of. If you've asked Jesus to take care of it, keep trusting and praying that he is, but don't try and take it back. Don't say, Lord Jesus, I'm at a loss. I don't know what to do, but I've got these 27,000 ideas that you should seriously consider. Or, Jesus is nothing. And tomorrow, how about this idea, Lord? How about I try this? There is a response of faith we need to give, but it is a response of faith to Jesus. So our praying needs to be as Jesus taught us, to be watching and praying. Or as Habakkuk learnt in Habakkuk 2, I went up onto the ramparts and stationed myself to see what the Lord would say to me. We need to be learning to listen to the voice of God so that we can respond and respond quickly. Our challenge is often that our idea of listening to God is actually telling him what he should be doing. The disciples listened, and they went and found it just as Jesus had said. I already mentioned, let's continue to be praying as Jesus taught us. May your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And can I say, come with us. We'll do you good. That's not just an individual thing. It's a corporate reality, what I'm talking about. Jesus has prepared and is preparing a bride. That's you and me. And what he's doing with us, little flock at the moment, is something wonderful. So come with us and we will do you good. If you look back, there is so much prophecy in the Old Testament that Israel had been looking forward to, that Jesus fulfilled, and that God fulfilled in Jesus. So there had been a preparation till Jesus. But there was an expectation that didn't take everything into account, that didn't take the whole counsel of God into consideration. There was, yes, Lord, there's the Romans occupying the land. There's Herod, this half-Jew, in the position of king. There is this temple that's just been finished, but it doesn't feel like we have actually fully returned from exile, even though physically it had started almost 500 years before. There had been a preparation, but they had been making their own plan rather than listening and waiting for the Lord. Sorry if I'm making funny noises. So it's very easy to not keep in step with Jesus. We can fall behind. And how do we fall behind? We get hung up on something along the way. One of my earliest childhood memories was getting lost in the shops. I have no idea how old I was, but I think probably about 4. So I was old enough to walk on my own, but but small enough that I shouldn't be on my own. And we had gone shopping as a family in a nearby town, and we had gone into a shop, and my eyes had got caught on something bright and sparkling. I have no idea what. But I had lingered, and the family had moved on. And after I had realized, this is nice, but actually, I think I'd like to find my mummy right now, looked up, not seen them, wandered round the shop, they're not there. Then, horror of horrors, stepped out of the shop and looked left and right and not seen them. And I remember distinctly the absolute panic. I won't tell you how many years later. Still, they're not inside, they're not outside. I've been left behind. Eventually discovering that they had just gone just round the corner and they had just realized that I wasn't with them. So a matter of seconds later, peeping back round the corner to see if I was behind. And we can fall behind with the Lord by getting caught up in what was happening before, instead of keeping in step with God. We can get sidetracked. Sometimes this happens during a time of recuperation where the Lord is just building in us precept upon. We can get sidetracked because we want something more exciting, more dynamic, more amazing. And we get sidetracked, and suddenly we find ourselves in the same position. We look, and Jesus is not next to us where we thought he was. You know what the great news is? We always know where to find him. Even if he's not where we expected him to be, we always know where to find him. He says, seek and you will find. Seek and you will find. Sometimes we get ahead of Jesus. It's a little awkward saying, Lord, I'm following you, when you're in front of him. But it happens. We get impatient. And impatience usually means we're ahead of him. And what's necessary is a little bit of humility so we can step back and allow him to be leading and for him to set the way. You know, it started with that table, but the table led to the tomb. Nobody felt prepared. I was going to say nobody was prepared, but nobody felt prepared for Jesus' death. Even though he had talked about it, even though he had done his absolute best to prepare, their paradigm said, this is wrong. This doesn't fit our thinking. And yet, there he was in the tomb. It's still an incomprehensible time. How could the Son be separated from the Father? One God, one essence, one being, yet somehow separated. I can't understand it. The question to ask is not how, but why. He was separated because of my sin. So that, just as the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit can never be separated again, so he guarantees that I will never be separated from him. You know what? He didn't even get his own tomb. He had to use somebody else's tomb. Joseph of Arimathea, or Joseph from Arimathea. I want to read you that passage. Matthew 27, from verse 57. As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had had cut out of the rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there opposite the tomb. They were the witnesses. Joseph only appears here in this story and only here in the scriptures. We don't hear anything else about him anywhere. But we do know that he was a disciple of Jesus. He followed Jesus because Arimathea, the name of a town, is not Jerusalem. So he had followed Jesus. He was there for the Passover, and he was really putting himself on the line because Jesus was dead, but he had believed in Jesus. So he was more comfortable to believe in Jesus while he was alive because maybe he's the Messiah. But now he's dead. He can't be the Messiah, surely. And yet Joseph was prepared to stand up and be counted. So who was he? Well, he was Joseph. And he came from Arimathea. You know, we don't even know where Arimathea is. There were several towns called Arimathea. And we don't know which one was his. So he was the man of, not of no name. He's the man with a name from nowhere. And this is the only time he appeared. But we do know a few things about him. He was a well-to-do businessman. Because even though he lived in Arimathea, he had a tomb prepared for himself in Jerusalem. That was the thing to do for rich men. You know, you can't take it with you. So why not be close to the city of the great king? So have it done. It says it was a new tomb that he had cut out of the stone. Guess what? Cutting stone isn't easy. And it wasn't any easier then. So he had to have had some resources to do it. And he had some good connections because he was able to go to Pilate and say, this is what I want. And to get it. So here is this rich, believing businessman whose moment of public prominence, witness, this one act determines his entire life. This is the one thing that's known about him. He was prepared. Jesus had prepared the upper room, but the Lord had prepared Joseph. Do you think he felt at the time like what he was doing was something amazing and significant that somebody who he's never heard of called Francis Judge would be talking about him 2,000 years later in a country he'd never heard of called South Africa? And yet, his preparation by God, his consistent faithfulness, has his name recorded in the scriptures. How do you feel about the Lord choosing to use you just once in the most incredibly significant way in your life? Everything about our modern culture says that's not enough. Everything tells us. And because of that, we're always looking for the glory moments. Or we're either looking for them or we're looking to avoid them. Instead of allowing the Lord to prepare us. Can I tell you one other thing about preparation? There is a consistency that's necessary. If we're not consciously consistent about being prepared, then we will not be ready when the moment arrives. And you know what's even worse than that? Is not realizing when we missed it. Joseph, I don't think, was even that conscious of the significance of what he was doing. And Jesus didn't actually need his tomb for long. But Joseph needed it later. You know what's also amazing? Not only do we not know where Arimathea is and who Joseph was, we don't even know where the tomb was. None of that stuff is significant. What's important was, it was there, It was part of God's preparation. Jesus used it for 3 days, and Joseph was left there. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how tombs worked in those days, because it feels like weird, the story that we read. But this was the norm at the time across multiple cultures. But it's changed dramatically at various stages. But at the time, what happened when you died was that you were taken to a tomb, a large place that people could walk into. We might call them like a mausoleum today, but it was a large place, usually a cave somewhere that had been converted to this. And your body was not put in a box, pine or supalani wood. It was left on a stone slab. Often you were covered just as a sign of respect, but that's how you were left. And what happened? Well, in most places, natural decomposition. So the spices that the women were taking when they discovered that Jesus wasn't there anymore were not to embalm him. That was something that only happened in Egypt. And it only happened in Egypt because it was so dry that the body never got a chance to decompose. So they embraced their situation. And they made it part of it. But the process, apart from the embalming, was exactly the same. That the body would go somewhere and be laid. For the rest of people, the body was laid on this slab, covered, and made to smell not too bad. And it was left for about a year. At the end of the year, what was usually left was the bones. The bones were then taken and placed in something called an ossuary, which means a bone box. And then they were placed somewhere permanently, and that was the final resting place. And we have thousands and thousands of examples of ossuaries. And we have lots of examples of these tombs that were not the final resting place of physical remains. So this is what was happening to Jesus. They had placed him in this tomb. And Joseph's commitment was not a short-term one, because he knew that this is where Jesus' body would stay for the next year, and that he, because it was his tomb, would then have to go and collect the bones, put them in an ossuary, and place them somewhere permanently. And there were different things that different people did with that. But that was the situation that Joseph placed himself in. Again, I just want to ask you, are you prepared to allow the Lord to use you just that once, just that significant moment that he has prepared for you? I have 2 other pictures, but I'm going to rush through them. The first one is how Jesus reveals himself in the breaking of bread after the resurrection to the 2 on the road to Emmaus. Of all the people that Jesus could have chosen to reveal himself to, he could have revealed himself first to Peter Blabbermouth, who would have told everybody. Well, actually, we know that he did. But Jesus chose these 2 previously unknown, unheard of disciples who weren't even in Jerusalem to reveal himself. Well, let's read it. I'm going to read from Luke 24, starting at verse 25. So Jesus is already pulled in. I suppose, walking from town to town could get pretty boring. So if there were other people on the way, you would walk together. And I suppose there's also a bit of security in that. So Jesus is already kind of pulled in next to these 2 guys. And he said to them, "How foolish are you, and how slow to believe all the prophets," because they've been busy trying to persuade Jesus just how tragic what has just happened to Jesus is. But here is Jesus. They're trying to persuade him. And he says to them, how foolish are you, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things? Isaiah 53. And then enter into his glory. Beginning with Moses, so apparently not just Isaiah 53, and all the prophets. He explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. That must have been quite a long walk. As they approached the village to which they were going, Emmaus, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, stay with us. It's nearly evening. The day's almost over. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, weren't our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, it's true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon, Peter. Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized to them when he broke the bread. How Jesus was recognized to them when they broke the bread. Please don't forget the challenge that we were given just now about breaking bread, either on your own or with your family, with somebody else this week at home. Jesus is recognized in the breaking of bread. It's easy, and all the grief, there's a grieving that's going on right now of the loss of all that we've had, the acceleration of what has been lost in these last few weeks here in our beautiful country has caused a kind of grief in many of us. We're beyond anger now. It feels more like grief. And grief can distract us and close our eyes to the hope of the resurrection in Jesus. When Paul speaks to the Thessalonians, he says, I don't want you to grieve as those who have no hope. Talking about loved ones who've passed away. But he's also speaking to us now as believers. I don't want you to grieve as those who have no hope. Do we grieve? Yes. He's not saying don't grieve. He's saying as you grieve, do so as those who have hope. Why? Because I've been preparing a journey. The journey's not over. The destination is set. Look what I've already done. I prepared the upper room. I prepared the disciples. I presented myself to those on the Emmaus Road. I did all of that just as I said. I've also said, be prepared, I'm coming back as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Lift up your eyes. We sang about it just now. Lift up your eyes. See the King coming. And what is that hope? That hope is the table to which we're going. So we saw the table where Jesus gave this incredible picture. We saw Jesus in the tomb. We saw the travelers whom Jesus reintroduced himself to, and their eyes were opened when he broke bread with them. And the final consummation of this we find in Revelation 19, the last book and the third last chapter of the book. Revelation 19 from verse 6. Then I heard what sounded like a great multitude, like the roar of rushing waters, and like loud peals of thunder, shouting, Hallelujah! For the Lord, our Lord God Almighty, reigns. Let's rejoice and be glad and give him the glory. For the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Fine linen, bright and clean, was given to her to wear. Fine linen stands for the righteous acts of God's holy people. Then the angel said to me, write this, blessed are those who are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb. And he added, these are the true words of God. Jesus says, as a parting shot to the disciples, I won't do this again. I won't drink from this cup again until I drink it afresh with you in the kingdom. That's what this is. Who's the bride that Jesus is marrying? It's you and me. That's the church. I don't know about you. As a man, I'm offended to be a bride. But I am not offended to be Jesus' bride. I am not offended to be Jesus' bride. Because if ever there was an alpha man, it is Jesus. So the Last Supper was a precursor to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And why is it the marriage supper? Because now preparation is over. Fullness is here. Nadine and I moved from, we got married pretty quickly. So after talking on the phone almost every day for almost a year, I sat her down. I've told this story before. Said, this is what I want. I'm really interested in having a relationship with you. And if I have a relationship with you, it's got one end in mind. So I want you to think and pray about it because these are the consequences of it. And she did. She came back and said, okay. But in typical Nadine fashion, she said, don't think that this is the same as asking me to be your girlfriend. So I did that immediately. A month later, I proposed to her. And I said, this is a good rhythm. Let's just get married next month. And she, still having a head on her shoulders, said, it takes a little longer than 30 days to prepare a wedding. But the point is that there's a preparation. It happens quickly. And being engaged is a time of preparation and anticipation. That is our spiritual reality now. And life, the grief of life, can overcome and overwhelm what it is that we're hoping for, that we actually have a taste of in reality now. The new creation reality that 2 Corinthians 5:17 talks about. That is eternity in our hearts. Not in some weird, spooky spiritual sense. In reality. Even though our bodies perish, we will continue to live and live with Jesus because Christ in us is greater than death. His disciples became witnesses of Jesus' death on the cross, his burial in Joseph's tomb, his resurrection, his reappearing in the upper room, and on through Pentecost, his ascension to the right hand of the Father, and they were witnesses of his promised return as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So, in conclusion, I just want to ask us this, because Easter isn't just a tradition. It's the hinge on which all of Christian faith hangs. The resurrection isn't just about a past event, but about a living Christ. He's taken us on a journey. He's continuing the journey, but he has taken us, and we are on that journey. That journey is from the tomb to the table. We've passed the tomb as believers, and we're awaiting that final table. So I want to ask you, do you have that full assurance of faith? Because if you don't, or if you've lost the assurance of it, he wants to restore it. He will come again just as he came the first time. Do you feel like you've been missing Jesus in your day-to-day life? Is there that grieving that I spoke of? Did that kind of resonate with you? Life has just been tough. And you're struggling with why are we not seeing the breakthrough that we keep hearing about? Why have we not seen it yet? Are you caught in that grief? The point of Sundays, and especially Resurrection Sunday, is that reminder, that refocusing, the lifting of our eyes to know that we don't grieve as those who have no hope. You can have hope if you've got sidetracked, if you've feel like you've been a bit left behind. Even if you're running ahead, you can find Jesus again.